Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about Andy Beshear in the 2026 Kentucky Senate race, where an article came out a few days ago by a top Democratic donor in the state of Kentucky that said they wanted to see Andy Beshear run for the U.S. Senate race. Now, an article has come out, I believe by a top advisor of Beshear, saying that he will not be running for Senate in 2026. But I want to talk about this because this is such an interesting conversation and one that I've been seeing a lot of talk about, both online, but even in my own comment section as well. I remember responding to a few comments about Andy Beshear and a possible run for Senate. Now, to be clear, Andy Beshear has made it known that he will not be running for U.S. Senate. Beshear's top political strategist, Eric Hires, says that Beshear's stance has not changed, which is that Governor Beshear promised to serve his full second term as governor and intends to do so. For him, it's not about a future choice, but his love for and his commitment to his current job. Andy loves Kentucky, and his job as governor lets him fight for the Commonwealth every day, Hires said in a statement to the Herald Leader. This comes as one of Kentucky's most prominent political donors and philanthropist, Christy Brown, of the Brown-Forman Spirits dynasty in Louisville, wrote a guest column in the Courier-Journal and spoke out strongly in favor of Beshear running for the Senate in 2026 to succeed Mitch McConnell. Okay, so that's the background of this news. Now, first things first, let's talk about this. And this is where I start to begin giving my own opinion and speculating here. Why does Andy Beshear not want to run? Him and his political team gave his reason, which is that he wants to continue being governor of Kentucky and he wants to serve out the rest of his term. That is the answer they're saying. The answer that I think is going on behind the scenes is one that's pretty obvious when a governor says that they don't want to run for Senate, and that's because Andy Beshear wants to run for president in 2028. Now, with respect to Andy Beshear, if he were to become the Democratic nominee, he would be one of the best general election candidates that there is. But thus far, he does not really have much of a chance at becoming the Democratic nominee in 2028. And yes, he has at times, I do believe, essentially ruled out running for president in 2028. But how many times do candidates end up running for president and say, no, I'm not running for president, I'm not thinking about that right now, and ultimately they change their mind and end up running for president? Now, Beshear could be being completely honest and saying he just wants to finish out his term as governor and not run for Senate and maybe even not run for president in 2028. But at least Beshear, if he runs for Senate, potentially him losing a Senate race could hurt the image that he has built up for himself, which is a Democrat being elected twice now in a very Republican state. That hurts him and his image if he were to run for Senate and lose. Now, let's go down the path where maybe Beshear is telling the truth, where he just wants to serve out his term and he doesn't want to run for Senate or anything until his term is over. And let's say he's also telling the truth, where he decides not to run for president in 2028. Well, there is one pretty important position that Beshear is leaving himself open to, which could be vice president. Because right now the early polling leaders in 2028 for the Democrats are former VP Kamala Harris, Governor of California Gavin Newsom, and Pete Buttigieg from, obviously, President Biden's administration. All three of them would be considered, at very least, from more Democratic areas, aside from Pete Buttigieg, who's from Indiana. But Newsom and Harris, the two leaders thus far, certainly from coastal elite backgrounds. They would probably have a pretty difficult time winning over a lot of rural and blue-collar voters. Now, someone that could help them with that could be the very popular governor of the state of Kentucky, someone that has done that in 2 consecutive elections now. And look, I'm not trying to really stop or belittle or anything of what Governor Beshear has done in Kentucky. He won his re-election in 2023 in the governor's race against Daniel Cameron by 5.1%, a very impressive showing for a Democrat in the state of Kentucky. He also, back in 2019, defeated the Republican governor Matt Bevin by 0.36% in a very close competitive race. Beshear is certainly the top Democrat in the state of Kentucky, and if he were to run for the Senate race in 2026, would give the Democrats a rare opportunity at even being competitive in the Kentucky Senate race. When you look at the recent elections in the state, they have not been close. 2022, Rand Paul won by 23.6%. 2020, Mitch McConnell, his approval ratings, his age and why he's not running again, his approval ratings are very poor. He still won against Amy McGrath by 19.5% in 2020. 2016, Rand Paul won by 14.5. Mitch McConnell in 2014 won by 15.5%. Kentucky at the Senate level has been a reliably red state. At the presidential level, it just voted for Donald Trump by 30.5% in 2024, and in 2020, where Joe Biden improved from 2016 over pretty much everywhere Hillary Clinton did, Trump still won the state by 26 points. So Andy Beshear likely knows a Senate run, despite what many top Democrats are hoping and wanting. Beshear likely knows in a Senate race in Kentucky, he would still probably end up losing, even if it would be a very tough race. And this is where the argument gets made from Democrats. Well, Andy Beshear is very popular in Kentucky. Why do you think he's going to lose? 2 words for you. Larry Hogan. Larry Hogan, popular former governor of the state of Maryland, left office with very high approval ratings in the state despite being a liberal Republican in a Democratic state of Maryland. Maryland's probably just as Democratic as Kentucky is Republican. Larry Hogan runs for Senate in 2024 in an open race against Democrat Angela Alsobrooks. Larry Hogan does much better than President Trump does in the state of Maryland, 100%. And that is certainly to be commended to Larry Hogan for that. Angela Alsobrooks still ends up winning by around 12% over Larry Hogan. Now again, President Trump lost the state by 28.5. So that is about a 16-point improvement from going from 28.5 down to 11.8 for Larry Hogan. That is a massive improvement and definitely something Larry Hogan should be proud of. But again, a state is so overwhelmingly Democratic, Hogan really had no chance of winning. Montana in 2020, Steve Bullock, former Democrat governor of the state, popular approval ratings, again, running in the state that is overwhelmingly Republican. Not as much as Kentucky or Maryland is, but still very Republican. Steve Daines ends up defeating Bullock by 10 points. One more for you. 2018, Phil Bredesen in Tennessee. Very similar to Maryland and Kentucky in terms of being red. Phil Bredesen, former governor, popular governor, once again, left office, high approval ratings. Marshall Blackburn wins by 11 points. Now, we have seen this work where our governor has been an incumbent senator or an open race. In 2018, Rick Scott did it in Florida. Florida at the time was also one of the closest swing states in the United States. Rick Scott's approval ratings were decently popular, right around 50-50 when he entered the race. It was also, again though, a swing state. He was not running in a state that was plus 30 points for the opposite party, like Andy Beshear would have to do in Kentucky. So if Andy Beshear were to run for the Senate seat in Kentucky, you absolutely bet Andy Beshear would do much better than Trump winning the state by 30.5% in 2024, or do much better than 2020, where Mitch McConnell won the state by 19.5%. Beshear certainly would do that. Would he get it under 10 points? Yeah, I think he would. Could he get it within 5 points? That I'm less sure of, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. But the state is so far to the right, it's not really possible for Beshear to win that race. So Beshear likely sees the writing on the wall here and says, I have a much better chance if I want to run for a future office for president or vice president by not running for this race, not having any tarnish on my political legacy, and not having to worry about losing a Senate race, even if it is more competitive. Now, in terms of doing the Democratic Party is solid, Andy Beshear running for Senate in Kentucky would be a very great move for the National Democrats, and I'll explain why. The Senate map right now for 2026, I have Republicans favored in 51 seats, Democrats in 45. Republicans already have a narrow majority and are probably going to hold the majority in the U.S. Senate, but let's say the Democrats right now are able to get Andy Beshear into the Kentucky Senate race. I don't personally think there's a scenario where Andy Beshear will win. Again, you can fight me on that all day long. The fact is Andy Beshear would not be able to win for the reasons I laid out. But what if Andy Beshear gets the race under 15 points and around 10 points? What if he even finds a way to get it under 5 points? If Kentucky at all is even remotely competitive to the point where the Republicans are fearing the Republican candidate could lose, like Daniel Cameron, who Beshear did beat back in 2023, the Republicans would have to throw in national money and national resources and campaign volunteers and campaign workers from the RNC into Kentucky to defend the seat. They cannot lose a Republican Senate seat in the state of Kentucky. That does not happen in a vacuum. Despite all the political money that is spent on elections, money is not an infinite resource in elections. It is a finite resource. So if Republicans are spending money in Kentucky, that could be taking away money and resources they could be spending in North Carolina, in Georgia, in Michigan, in Maine. So Andy Beshear, though I don't think he has any chance at winning a Senate seat in Kentucky, and seeing as he's not going to run for Senate, I think he probably agrees with that fact. Him running would actually be doing the National Democratic Party a very big solid. That's why I think you also see Sherrod Brown running for Senate in Ohio. Sherrod Brown could conceivably win this race, but I think the odds are stacked against him that most of the time he's probably not going to win. Mary Peltola in Alaska, very similar. I don't think she's going to win that Senate race if she enters, but it gives the Democrats a much stronger chance. And even potentially in Texas with James Tallarico and Colin Allred running for Senate there. Dan Osborne running in Nebraska. All the Democrats running in Iowa. These are all states that I think after Election Day 2026, I think the Republicans are going to win all of them. But I think the Republicans are going to win them by less margins of victory than they have in the past 2 or 4 years or so in the previous election cycles. So what does that mean? Well, if the Republicans are facing closer races in these states, they're going to have to throw money and resources into them, which is going to potentially hurt them in the swing battleground states like Maine, like Michigan, like North Carolina, like Georgia, like New Hampshire, where the Democrats are being on the offensive and not on the defensive. So Andy Beshear is not going to run for Senate in Kentucky in 2026, but if he did, it would be helping the Democrats out, even if he didn't win. It'd be helping the Democrats out potentially in a lot of other places. But again, that's all I have for you on this topic. It's going to be talked about a lot, I'm sure. Andy Beshear not running for Senate in 2026 in Kentucky. He's not going to. It will be a safe Republican win. But if he were to run, it would be something that would help the Democrats, though I don't think Beshear would ultimately win. But if you disagree, feel free to leave all your comments and stuff down in the comment section below. Can't wait to check all that out. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the state of Nebraska and an article I saw from Nebraska Examiner, which talks about the possibility of President Trump having Nebraska lawmakers to meet at the White House about redrawing its state's congressional map. So this is all about President Trump trying to redraw several Republican states to get extra Republican House seats to try and keep the Republican majority. Now, this article says that at least 4 Nebraska lawmakers have confirmed with the Examiner they're headed to Capitol Hill on Tuesday. The official reason is the leadership conference organized by the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. But Nebraska and Iowa lawmakers are scheduled to hear firsthand how President Trump is implementing the America First agenda and how to advance it at the state and local level. Now, this obviously, though, as they're going to be at the White House, this could be something relating to redistricting. As, according to Axios and other political news outlets, national politics website Punchbowl News had already reported Nebraska as a possible target for such a redistricting push. Axios' article mentioned Kansas as well. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Nebraska overall, let me pull up the House map here, has 3 congressional seats. It has Nebraska's 3rd, which is a very safe Republican district. It has Nebraska 1, which the Republican Congressman Flood won by about 20.2%. Overall for him, a safe Republican win. Now, the presidential race was actually a little bit more competitive, with the 1st district falling under 15 points for Donald Trump, so it was a likely Republican win and actually did trend towards the Democrats a little bit, though still, for 2024 reasons, a very solid win. Now, the 2nd congressional district, which is where the city of Omaha is, this is where things got very, very close. Kamala Harris won here by 4.7% against Donald Trump. Back in 2020, Joe Biden won it by 6.6%. So 2 presidential elections in a row now, Nebraska's 2nd district have voted for the Democrats. In 2016, Donald Trump won against Hillary Clinton by 2.2%. At the House level, this district has been narrowly held by Republican Don Bacon, where he won it in 2024 by 1.9%. 2022, he won it by 2.7%, and before it was redrawn, he won it by 4.6%. Now, Don Bacon has already announced that he will not be running for this seat in 2026, so it will be an open race. The Cook Political Voting Index for this district is currently Democrat plus 3. So it's not impossible the GOP holds this seat in 2026, but most of the time, given the election environment for 2026, the Democrats should be flipping Nebraska's 2nd to their side. But now, if the Republicans, which is currently listed in the 2026 rankings as lean for the Democrats, if President Trump were able to get Nebraska's lawmakers to redraw the congressional map in Nebraska, not only could the Republicans redraw the map and give them a chance of winning it it could cement the 2nd District as potentially a solid Republican district in the state of Nebraska, which obviously that has huge ramifications, even though it's only one House seat at the House level, where it gives the Republicans an extra seat, guaranteeing them one extra, and getting them even closer to their majority and holding it, where based on the consensus rankings, they start out with 213 in that scenario, only needing 5 more seats to hold the House. Now, there's a lot going on in the House side of things with redistricting. Texas obviously just happened. California's referendum is up for November of 2025. That's expected to pass, and if so, the Democrats could be netting another 5 seats in the state of California. Florida, Ron DeSantis has said he wants to redraw the congressional map. That could be netting the Republicans another 5 seats in Florida. Missouri, Republicans are targeting Missouri 5. That district could be going red as well. Kansas in the 3rd district could potentially be going red as well. So redistricting is in a very interesting place right now, but President Trump and the Republicans are certainly targeting every red state that they can, and Nebraska's 2nd district is certainly on that list of priorities. Now, what's interesting is last month, retiring Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon confirmed to the Examiner that the preliminary discussions had already begun about the legislature perhaps redrawing the Omaha-based 2nd district to make it harder for Democrats to win. And while Republicans hold all of Nebraska's congressional seats, political experts see the now open 2nd district as a possible pickup for the Democrats, like I went over in this video. So if the Republicans were to redraw it, that would certainly be very big for them at the House level. But another important conversation about Nebraska is for the presidential race. Nebraska, along with the state of Maine, are the only 2 states in the United States that allocate their presidential electoral votes both by the winner of the state and by congressional district. So whichever candidate gets more votes at the state level, for instance, whoever gets more votes in the state, 2 of the electoral votes in Nebraska and Maine will go for the winner of the state. President Trump won Nebraska, he gets 2 votes. President Trump lost to Vice President Harris. In Maine goes 2 votes for Kamala Harris. But then it goes by which candidate wins each congressional district. Maine, it's split. Maine 1 went for Harris, Maine 2 went for Trump. In 2024, Nebraska 1 and Nebraska 3 went for Trump, but Nebraska 2 ended up going for Harris. Now for 2026, I'm just using Newsom and Vance as a placeholder right now for 2026. The 2nd district, based on the way it's currently constructed, probably would go for Gavin Newsom. And based on the trends of Omaha and how fast it's growing and trending towards the Democratic direction, it would probably go for the Democrats by more than 5 points. But what if it didn't? What if the Republicans redrew the 2nd district in Nebraska to be more of a Republican district, getting some other rural areas surrounding Omaha and making it more of a Republican district? Well then, instead of the Republicans splitting Nebraska's 2nd and Maine 2nd, the 2 competitive districts of Nebraska and Maine, Republicans could be guaranteeing them winning both Nebraska, potentially by a large margin, and Maine by a large margin as well. This would get the Republicans, based on the current toss-up maps, would advance up to 220, where then, if Vance were to carry North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona and Nevada, this would get J.D. Vance, look at this, at 269 electoral votes. At this point, the worst he could do in terms of the electoral vote number would be to tie. This is without Vance carrying Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, 3 states that Donald Trump won in 2024, or New Hampshire, which Kamala Harris won, only by 2.8%. Whereas if Vance were to lose the 2nd district in Nebraska to Gavin Newsom, Newsom would still have a path to winning the presidential election outright on the electoral vote total by carrying the other competitive battleground states. That would get Newsom to 270, narrowly defeating J.D. Vance. But with Vance carrying the 2nd district, it would be 269, and we'd have to go to the Congress to decide who the next president is. So this 2nd district, it's only 1 electoral vote at the presidential side of things, and it's only 1 House district on the House side of things. But this redrawing of this district could literally be the difference between the next president of the United States being a Republican or a Democrat. It can be all the difference whether the next House majority in 2026 is Republican or Democratic. So this 2nd district in Nebraska, if it gets redrawn, is absolutely huge and crucial for the future of American elections. Even if 1 electoral vote doesn't seem like it is, it absolutely is. So what happens with the 2nd district, and if it gets redrawn, is going to have major ramifications for the 2026 elections and maybe even the 2028 presidential election. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're going over a new poll released by Emerson College Polling for the 2025 Boston mayoral election, where this is going to be, even though it's technically nonpartisan, but still Democratic Mayor Michelle Wu holding roughly a 50-point lead over challenger Josh Kraft in the Boston preliminary election, which the Boston preliminary election is going to be taking place on Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, to narrow the field down to just 2 candidates. It's possible things change, but it's expected to be Michelle Wu and Josh Kraft facing off in the general election. Now, Emerson Polling, which Emerson is based out of Boston, has conducted a new poll in this race, and it shows the incumbent mayor, Michelle Wu, with a very significant lead over Kraft. 72% say they support Wu compared to 22% who support Kraft. This is a big change from February, when Wu support is increased by 29 percentage points, from 43% up to 72%, while Kraft support is decreased by only 7 points, from 29 to 22%. So the biggest change here, at least by looking at the numbers, is not that Kraft support has gone down by an absolutely massive amount. It's only been about a 7-point difference, but Wu has gone up by 29 points, an absolutely seismic growth in the polls in that one. It shows, again, Wu at 72, Kraft at 22, and about 2% undecided at this current point in time. Over the past 7 months, Mayor Wu appears to have made her case for re-election to Boston voters, while Kraft has not been able to expand his support, said Spencer Kimball, the executive director of Emerson College Polling. In February, white voters were split between Kraft and Wu, 39 to 37. Now they break for Wu, 74 to 22%. Wu's margins among minority populations have also grown, increasing 7 points among Hispanic voters from 54 to 61%, climbing to 79% among black voters, and jumping from 58 to 81% among Asian voters. Nearly 3 in 4 Boston voters, 73%, have an overall favorable view of Mayor Michelle Wu, while 24% have an unfavorable view of her, compared to a majority of voters, 58%, hold an unfavorable view of Kraft, while 26% have a favorable view. That is obviously not very good numbers for Kraft to be in. Wu holds a high approval among Boston voters. 66% approve of the job that she is doing while in office, while 24% say they disapprove. Regarding the mayor's refusal to drop Boston's sanctuary city policies, 67% say they approve of this decision, 23% say they disapprove. Boston voters disapprove of President Trump sending members of the National Guard to Boston to, quote, combat crime, 77 to 20%, so a massive margin there. In the Emerson August national poll, 48% of voters disapprove of Trump deploying the National Guard in Boston, while 41% approve. So in the city of Boston itself, based on this poll, the people of Boston, Bostonians, have a much more negative view of Trump doing that than at the national level. A plurality of voters, 45%, think their community in Boston is safer than it was 4 years ago, while 21% think it is less safe, 35% think they have seen really no difference. A third of Boston voters, 33%, listed threats to democracy as the top issue facing the United States, while 17% said the economy, 12% housing affordability, 11% healthcare, 9% immigration, and 3% said crime. And then it also goes into some issues as well, saying at the start of the 25-26 school year, 54% think Boston public schools are headed in the right direction, while 46% think they are on the wrong track. This is a flip from February, where 54% said they were on the wrong track, 46% in the right direction. Boston voters overall are split on bike lanes. 35% think there are too many, 35% think there are enough, and 30% think there are not enough bike lanes. Redevelopment of White Stadium as a revenue for Boston's new National Women's Soccer League NWSL team is supported by voters overall 48 to 29, with 23% undecided. Boston voters overwhelmingly support a Boston-based WNBA team, 78 to 8. Of the 4 major Boston area sports teams as well, a plurality of voters, 39%, expect the Boston Celtics to win the next championship in their respective sport, down from 65% in February. 15% think the Boston Red Sox will be the next to win a championship, 7% for the Boston Bruins, and 3% for the New England Patriots. I have never seen a poll talk about sports so much in a political poll, and I gotta tell you, I'm here for it. I absolutely love it. I would also love to meet the 7% of Bostonians that think the Boston Bruins have a chance of winning the Stanley Cup. I would love to meet those people. Okay, so a lot's going on here, including a little bit into my personal opinion and fan of the NHL. A lot going on here. For one, when you look at the polls from Boston, the mayoral race, before this, the last video I did on this poll from Emerson College had not yet come out. But it was one from back in July from Suffolk University that showed Wu leading Kraft about 60% to 30%, about a 30-point lead. The last poll from St. Anselm College before that, a local college in New Hampshire, showed Wu leading 53.4 to 21. Overall, again, roughly about a 32-point lead. And then Emerson's last poll in February showed the closest of them all at 43 to 29. Overall, about a 14-point lead with 24% undecided. The question was going to be, could Josh Kraft do enough to make this a more competitive race? Because it looks like Michelle Wu was probably going to win this race anyway, but could Josh Kraft make enough inroads with Bostonians to make this race more competitive and potentially defeat Wu? Now the question is going to be, Michelle Wu is probably going to win. The question is going to be how much. Because in the early polling thus far, this poll from Emerson College, which is a very reputable polling source around the country, it's often a very frequent polling source I trust in a lot of these races, it shows Michelle Wu not only is going to win against Josh Kraft, she's going to win by an absolutely landslide, seismic margin. Just to give you an idea, she won her 2021 mayoral election in Boston, Michelle Wu, I think by something way smaller than this margin. I think it was like around 30% or so. This is a way larger margin than that. 72 to 22, that is a 50-point lead for Michelle Wu over Josh Kraft. Now, it's possible this poll could ultimately end up being an outlier, but when you look at the previous supports here, Emerson in their last poll had Kraft at 29. St. Anselm had Kraft at 21.1. Suffolk had Kraft at 29.6. This poll is Kraft at around 22. The margins on Kraft's side are not all too far off. Two polls have them around 22%. Two polls have them around 29-30%, including Emerson's own from back in February. So Kraft, at very least, is probably polling at around 30% of the vote, or maybe a little bit lower at this current point in time. There are still some undecided votes out there, but based on this poll, there aren't much. When push comes to shove between Kraft and Michelle Wu, a lot of those undecided votes break for Wu, and by a very substantial margin. So how this ends up going overall, and this again the head-to-head of Kraft versus Wu, showing a 73 to 22 win. This would not just be an election win for Michelle Wu over Josh Kraft, it would be one of seismic, catastrophic proportions for Michelle Wu and Kraft. And it's very interesting to be seeing this here, because going into this year, there wasn't a ton of polling done, but a lot of talk among local Bostonians was that Michelle Wu could maybe be potentially vulnerable to a well-funded challenger. And Josh Kraft, obviously the son of Patriots owner and CEO Robert Kraft and brother of VP of the Patriots Jonathan Kraft, the Kraft name is very well known in Boston and in Massachusetts. So you would think that would give Kraft at very least a fighting chance in this mayoral race. But Michelle Wu really seems to have consolidated a lot of her support in this race, where even if this poll is an outlier, and we can even take out the other Emerson poll, the other two polls easily have her breaking 50% of the vote. So Michelle Wu, really in a re-election campaign, is looking like she's in a very strong position to win this race and to win it by a very seismic margin. So now when we look on the map here, again, I don't have a specific map of the city of Boston, so I'm using the state of Massachusetts to represent it at all. The last video I was talking about is the possibility of seeing a Josh Kraft win even possible in the mayoral race. Now we're looking at not only are we not going to see a Josh Kraft win, what is the size of Michelle Wu's win? Because right now, based on this poll, it would be over 50 points, which is what the safe rating is. At 50 points or so, it would literally be 3 times the margin of the safe rating, plus an additional 5% based on this poll for 50 points. Now, could this race narrow up in the coming month or so, heading into November? Now that Labor Day hit, if Kraft is able to change his messaging and maybe make some inroads to some of the undecided voters that broke for Wu in this poll, could Kraft narrow the margin? Yes, he could. And honestly, since Wu is leading by such a substantial margin, it almost seems a little bit hard to believe where Wu would win by really anything more than 40% of the vote. She definitely could, don't get me wrong, but to see a blowout win like that in today's political day and age, it almost feels kind of hard to believe. But Maybe Michelle Wu wins by 30, maybe she wins by 20, maybe she wins by 50. At the current state of the race right now, the question is, can Josh Kraft even get this win, or this race, under a 15% win for Michelle Wu? Where it's under 15 points, Michelle Wu would still probably win, but could it be competitive? At this current time, the answer seems to be a resounding no. It looks like Michelle Wu is going to go on to win another term as mayor of Boston, and to do so by a resounding victory. So obviously very good news for Michelle Wu, very poor news for Josh Kraft. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're from Boston or Massachusetts, make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. What you think about this race, who you would support between Wu and Kraft as well, and any other information you can toss out about this race if you're watching this more intensely than obviously a lot of us are. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video.